Welcome to the UN General Assembly's Science Summit. My name is Brian Lung. I am a member of the Belmont Forum Secretariat. And you're here today because you're interested in learning about how to build equitable partnerships, especially when it comes to urban heat islands, and as well as how to create identify best practices for urban heat mapping. In this session, we're going to go over how our partners from around the world deal with this issue, and making sure that everyone in the community is involved and understands how to work with the community. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, trust is an underlying issue. And so before I jump in, I want to have a few, mention a few things. First of all, in the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen, you'll see a closed caption, and you can try to click on that, and it will help you with the English transcription. Alternatively, if you have questions at any moment, any time, there is also Q&A, so don't forget to click on that. We're going to have a quick interactive activity. An introduction, interactive activity, and then go into our panelists to talk about what they are doing within their countries. And it's exciting today because we have people from all around the world. We have a member from Santiago. We have a member from who is part of the urban heat mapping campaigns. We have another member from Rio de Janeiro, another member from the United States, and one from India. So learning about best practices about what they do, as well as what progress and what state of the campaign that they are in. And so with that, what I want to do is go into the heat aspect and what is extreme heat, mainly because this year has been pretty crazy for everyone around the world. In August 2023, so last month, the U.S. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration found that it was 1.25 degrees higher than normal. And four continents in Asia, Africa, North America, and South America had the warmest on record in August. Europe and Oceania also had their second warmest August as well. And these global marine heat waves and a growing El Nino are driving a lot of additional warming this year. But as long as emissions continue driving a steady march, background warming, we expect further records to be broken for many years. So, for example, Peru had its warmest August on record. And if you're from Peru, then you definitely probably felt that. In Japan, August was ranked the warmest on record as well. In Hong Kong, it was also recorded the warmest record in August. Turkey, Israel, even the Arctic had a very warm August. And it's kind of surprising to think the Arctic would always be cold, but apparently it got really warm there this summer. The Caribbean also was really warm. And even the contiguous US was ranked 9th warmest on the record. So I think heat is a huge issue. And I want to bring in the next conversation about how do we classify a heat wave? Because part of the classification of a national and part of that question is what is a national disaster? According to WMO's early warnings for all, we want to help work on that issue as well to identify what is a multi-hazard early warning system and initiative. So we're going to tap into that as a conversation today. We'll also talk about how does heat impact our bodies, especially when we're hot and when we sweat. It makes us lose fluids and electrolytes, and that makes our blood vessels dilate to increase swelling. On top of that, it can drop our blood pressure, or it can lead to a drop in blood pressure to make us even dizzy and even pass out. This can lead to a lot of heat-related illnesses. So thinking about how this heat wave or this increase in this global temperature, we're going to have a lot of human conditions that affect us down the line, such as heat stroke and maybe even long-term effects such as chronic kidney disease. So in a sense, why is extreme heat an issue? For many reasons. Extreme heat is an overlooked issue. And from that fact, many of those impacts are invisible, and it's not immediately as visible as a hurricane or a tornado. And I think it's important to also mention the fact that a lot of these issues may not be apparent immediately, maybe down the line for years to come, and it gets worse over the years. And this session, I want to just recap. It's to address the Sustainable Development Goals, numbers 13, which is for climate action, 17, which is for equitable for partnerships, as well as tapping into the conversations around justice and climate justice. And with that, one of the things I would like to do is create a sense of where everyone is around the world. So we have an activity called we use on Menti, if people are familiar with that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen briefly to see what people, if you can see it. And if you, and what you can do is go to menti.com on your phone. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in the code 6210097. I will also try to put it into the chat so that everyone else can participate. Trying to get a sense of where everyone is from. Alternatively, I'll put it into the chat so that everyone gets a chance to say where they're from. All right, one member from the US. We have other people from around the world, so we'll definitely be broadly represented. So if you're just joining us today, we're trying to do a little activity of where people are from around the world. You have Chile, some of the Pan Americas. This is great. And for the new person, if you're just joining us today, my name is Brian Lung. I am part of the Belmont Forum Secretariat. And what we do at the Belmont Forum is we try to bring people together to fund issues related to global environmental change. One of the ways they want to do this is potentially supporting urban heat campaigns. Anyway, next question. For us to understand at the Belmont Forum why heat is important, tell us the impacts of heat and why you're worried about this in your community. A couple sentences, a couple lines is great to drop in. Help us build the context to understand why this heat and climate change and human health impact is really important to invest in for our group of funders. So I think you'll be able to see on your screen, it will shift over to the next slide. And if you see that on the next slide, let me paste the link into the chat again. What you'll see here is their place to put in, or you maybe see in the top of your phone or where your browser, you'll see, go to the next slide, type in a few words that you think are where heat has affected your community. So what we're going to do with this information from the Belmont Forum side is to understand how heat is affecting, and climate change is affecting our human health, but not just human health, ecological health, animal health, thinking about the whole One Health system, the systemic or system-based thinking of how not one thing affects one person or one community, but affects our ecological community as well. So it affects everyone, vulnerable populations, there's a lot of heat-related illnesses, impacts on food security, and it's also a silent killer, especially when it comes to long-term diseases. Most of the people who are affected are outdoor workers, and it can even affect reproductive outcomes. This is a fascinating topic. I did not know that. So I'm also learning about this. All right. And the next question is, how do you engage with your community on extreme heat? Let's dive into that a little more. Again, at the Belmont Forum, what we do for our research and what makes us as a funding group unique is that we want to bring science to action. action in the sense that information is easily picked up by decision makers, so that, and not only that decision makers, but also for the community. Wherever we work and around the world, we want to make sure that the community is interested, and they want to be able to learn from the science, because most of the time that science is inaccessible and incomprehensible to many people of the community, especially if the science literacy is not high enough. And this is great. Community of practice, pilot projects, engaging with researchers, and working with decision makers. These are all the things that we are looking for. One of the things that we call in the Belmont Forum is we call it decision science, because in the end, the decisions and choices we make do affect policy, and do also affect the community that we work with. So thank you for everyone for playing along with me on this interactive Menti activity. This has been very helpful for us to understand and get a sense of why the heat health is important as a topic that we should be looking into, and potentially work with the community and other scientific agencies to invest in. So thank you for that. So just to give a brief recap of this event, my name is Brian Lung. I am part of the Belmont Forum Secretariat. We are a funding organization that brings in all the scientific agencies, not all, many of the scientific agencies around the world, to focus on issues that are related to global environmental change. And today we're having a conversation on urban heat campaigns, because we think that in order to bring science to action, we need to understand the systems that are working well in many cities around the world, to bring that science to the community. And so we have 5 speakers from all around the world. One of our speakers is from Sierra Leone, Freetown, Sierra Leone, is unable to make it. And so we have 4, but these 4 are amazing, and you'll get to hear from them today. The first one is Raquel Jimenez Celsi. She's an assistant professor from Santiago, Chile. The next person I'll introduce on the list is Abian Tawari. He is the lead health and climate resilience at the National Resource Defense Council in India. Next, we have Dr. Nubia Beret Armand, assistant professor at the urban climatology at the Indiana University of Bloomington in the US, but she's primarily representing Rio. Next, in North America, we have Morgan Zabo. She is the Community Health and Heat and Health Information Coordinator at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So what we'll do now is we're going to turn the stage over to our speakers and have them talk a little bit about their campaigns, and to give you a sense of what is going on. And from there, we're going to go into questions that are related to what they do in their region. And first, I want to mention the main takeaway for today's session, this Q&A and this back and forth, is identify some common practices when engaging with the local community, and also identify differences working at the local, national, and international level. And the reason why we're focusing on these topics is because we want this to be that you can take this information and move with it and apply it to other natural disasters or in other systems that you are working on. It doesn't necessarily have to be about heat. It could be about diarrheal diseases and flooding. But the main focus here for today is to think about heat campaigns currently that are existing are doing really well. How can this be copy and pasted, or copy and pasted in a sense in different regions around the world that works? And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to Raquel, and she's going to take the floor.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Brian. I wanted to start by giving a short introduction about myself and the work that we're doing currently in terms of our urban heat mapping. So bear with me while I share my screen with you. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So I'll first start by introducing myself. As Brian shortly mentioned, I am based in Santiago, Chile. My name is Raquel Jimenez, and I am an environmental engineer by training. with a PhD in environmental health. So this is where I get my love of data and its connections to the human well-being. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Engineering Sciences at Universidad Andrés Bello, but I'm also affiliated to a couple of research centers that deal with the issue of extreme heat waves, and climate change in general, from the perspective of natural disasters management, but also to sustainable urban development. And so again, I'm based in Santiago, Chile, a beautiful city, by the way, that it's been increasingly impacted by all sorts of climate change related impacts, particularly heat waves getting stronger, increasing frequency and magnitude. And so from that perspective, I've been focusing more and more my research that that exists in the space between how urban environment can influence the well-being, the general well-being of people, and vice versa, how people can influence the urban environment, in trying to understand that relationship. And again, focusing more and more on the impacts of heat, and particularly on children, vulnerable populations, through a lens of environmental justice. I have to say that at the core of this work is having data that allows us to basically characterize this relationship. Unfortunately, in Chile and Chilean cities in general, we have very limited data on urban heat and ambient temperature in general. And this is a really a big issue, not only for researchers who try to understand the science of the nature of the connection between people, health and heat, but also it leads to some really pressing needs to take action and mitigating and adapting to heat waves and extreme heat. For example, even though we have accumulating evidence of the adverse health effects of heat on people's health, we really don't have a good sense of what those impacts are for the population of Chile and Chilean cities. As in many cities throughout the world, we know that risk is unequally and inequitably distributed within cities. So it's really important to understand how the magnitude and the extent of this threat varies within a city at a small scale. And this also interacts with susceptibility and vulnerability of the population, again, leading to an equal distribution of this risk, who gets impacted by it. And then, since we really cannot manage with what we don't measure, there's also limited capacity to understand the health impacts and equity impacts, which constitutes a really big obstacle for adaptation at the local level, which is what we need right now. And so at some point last year, I came across this amazing opportunity by NOAA to conduct urban heat mapping campaigns. And we applied. We got awarded with funds and, well, again, fantastic opportunity to highlight the pressing needs of generating data, and just like highlighting that this is a problem that it should be of a growing concern. We haven't conducted this campaign yet. So the project, it's called Santiago Hot. And our goal is to identify the urban heat islands in the greater Santiago area, with a strong focus on characterizing the small-scale spatial distribution of extreme heat exposure. Again, this is funded by the United States NOAA's Urban Heat Mapping Campaign program. A really cool aspect of these projects is that it's really a volunteer-based community science field campaign. So we rely on volunteers to go out and collect measurements that are then going to be integrated with all sorts of spatial data to create high-resolution extreme heat maps that can be used for a number of purposes. And we'll be conducting the campaign on the summer 2024 on the summer Southern Hemisphere, so probably around January. And this project has provided like the perfect opportunity to really connect with different actors that are relevant in the space of heat, health, climate justice, environmental justice, that usually are not talking to each other. And for this particular project, we were able to gather, again, different actors from different sectors, including the regional government of Santiago. Of course, NOAA was going to be providing all sorts of technical support, to NGOs that address really different topics from decisions on sustainable commuting, but also sustainable developments of cities and, for example, environmental exposures in schools. We're working with two different academic partners, two universities based in Chile, Andrés Bello University and the Pontific Catholic University, but we're also have the support of the Boston University School of Public Health, who have a lot of experience in both measuring exposure to heat, but also quantifying health effects and working with communities. And of course, at the core of this project is the citizen scientists that are going to be bringing this project to life. We anticipate that this project and the outcomes from this project are going to have a significant impact in how we deal with heat in not just Santiago, but in Chilean cities, and also just promoting action to tackle this problem. And so again, having maps with local scale data, it's essential to inform adaptation strategies at the local level, which is really needed to effectively protect the population. From my sense, right, from academia and research, this is a critical input that is going to allow to better understand exposure, the risk distribution, health impacts, and also really, really importantly, I think that it's going to be able to provide an opportunity to elevate risk awareness. Heat exposure and extreme heat is not a topic that it's at the top of concerns of the population, the general population, citizens, but also regulatory actors or even researchers. So this is going to be a great opportunity to just elevate this need and improve risk awareness and education. That's it. Thank you. You're muted, Brian.
My mistake. Thanks. So thank you so much, Raquel, for giving us an overview. Next is Abhyant from India, who's going to give us a little bit about his work that he's working on in India, and hopefully we can link the two together. Thank you. Abhyant, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Raquel, and thanks, Brian, for that wonderful work that you guys are doing in Chile. So what we are doing in India, I mean, there is no doubt that heat is an eminent issue, and an issue that we have to deal with in the coming future. That despite of all the efforts that we have promised to put together to address, the global warming and to limit the warming, despite of all the efforts, we'll definitely gonna face the spells of extreme heat events, which we cannot deny. So we need to prepare for that. And what we have been doing in India for past almost a decade now is that we prepared the heat action plans in India to address the issue of extreme heat, to protect our communities, particularly the vulnerable communities. Mapping the urban heat is still something that we are trying to do, but I'll go back to the basics that what we started with. So one of the cities in India, it's called Ahmedabad, which is in the western part of the country, in the western states of India, Gujarat, had a very bad, extreme heat spell in 2010, and from there, that city, decided to address this issue of extreme heat, to prepare their administration, their departments, and their community to address the future heat wave events, so that they don't face the same challenge that they faced in 2010, when there was more than 1,300 excess deaths that happened during 1 month of extreme heat, spell in May 2010. So the city decided to work on it, and I work for NRDC India, which is Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC India. We partnered with the local institutions, local knowledge partners, like local public health, institutions. We partnered with the local, legislative bodies, local urban local bodies, and we developed this heat action plan and implemented it for the first time in India in 2013, which had very simple measures to, very simple and local tailor-made measures to be implemented. For example, having an early warning system. Now that we talk about the early warning for all, uh, that's what we started back in 2013. Having an early warning, which is an impact-based early warning. So if you go back to the heat action plan, the first heat action plan of India, which is also the first heat action plan, comprehensive citywide heat action plan of the any South Asian city, that was primarily based upon the early warning system. And when we call it early warning for all, we have to be sure that it's an impact-based early warning system, right? Which means that we know what an imminent hazardous situation can do, and where it can do, what it can do, and who it can do. So we need to have that information in our early warning system. So we derived with our local thresholds for the early warning system of Ahmedabad heat action plan, the first heat action plan, where the residents of the city were informed what residents and also different departments were informed what decisions they have to take and what steps they have to take to protect themselves, their neighborhood, their families at different level of temperatures. So those information were derived from historical data when we analyze that data. So that was part of that early warning system as heat action under the heat action plan. Then we had community awareness and public outreach programs. So when I say community awareness, the targeted communities, like the vulnerable communities, not all people are equally affected by the heat, as Raquel was rightly saying. Different communities are affected differently. I mean, I might have access to heat, to air condition or fan, or to other measures of cooling, but that cannot, that may not be the same situation with all the communities, within a city or within a state, for that example. So reaching out different communities who are differently affected by the heat was one of the plan of the Ahmedabad heat action plan. Then building capacity of the key stakeholders, primarily the health department. Health obviously plays a key role. So building their capacity, building the capacity of health paramedicals and doctors in differentially diagnosing the heat-related illnesses during the summers, preparing them to deal with the imminent heat spell with enough stock and of medicines and required supplies in the hospitals, and what trainings that they require for their paramedical staff. And so such kind of measures, when we put together, has resulted in a significant reduction in this summer time, heat related morbidities and mortalities, which we have made, which we have documented and also published in the peer-reviewed journal. So what we found that after implementation of Ahmedabad heat action plan, there were more than 1,100 deaths which were averted during summertime after the implementation of the heat action plan. And the plan was well recognized and scaled to several other cities and districts and states in the India as a model plan. We are also helping the national, agencies like National Disaster Management Authority, the National Health Department and Meteorology Department in devising, different solutions to address this issue of extreme heat. But yeah, it's still a major issue. What Raquel was talking about, mapping heat is important. Why? Because through that we get to know who is affected and where is affected and how it is affected. It's not just the health of the people that is affected directly, but it's also indirectly the livelihood of the people that is getting affected. So we need to move from protecting the life of the people to the livelihood of the people. Because what we recently observed in India and in other parts of the world also is that heat is not just making people sick, increasing the hospitalization rate, but is also affecting the agriculture, is also affecting the power sector, is also affecting the transport sector, and they all cumulatively affect the economy. So we need to move from this agenda, this, idea of protecting health to protecting life to protecting livelihood. When we talk about addressing the issue of extreme heat. Yeah, so that's all that I wanted to, highlight here and bring it from our experience to this honest forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhiyant. I loved how both you and Raquel connected on many important points that heat affects. I like how Raquel mentioned about the vulnerable communities that she's working with and really tackling it from an environmental justice angle. And then Abhiyant, you took it a little further and was like, not only we're at a different stage of our progression in terms of the urban heat mapping, we're also not just thinking about the health side, we're also thinking about the economic side, how heat affects transportation, also affects infrastructure. And I'd like to see that this is a different step in the progression towards, or a different advancing stage in the mapping campaigns. So thank you for those who are joining us today. My name is Brian Lung. I'm part of the Belmont Forum, a secretary of the Belmont Forum. As a funder, we're trying to understand how heat campaigns are being formed and this transdisciplinary process and the way that it happens. So if you have questions, please place them into the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to answer them throughout the progress. Next, we have Nubia. She's from Rio de Janeiro, and I'll pass the floor to her.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, trying to share some of our experiences in heat mapping in Rio. The first thing I would like to say is I'm assistant professor of climatology. At the time of the campaign, I was working at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Now I am just arrived in US 30 days ago, to be assistant professor at Indiana University, Bloomington. But we definitely ran the campaign through, my period in there. I am trained as a geographer, focusing on impacts of heavy rainfall and extreme heat in urban spaces. As a Latin American citizen, I think that there's impossible for us to think about things like extreme heat or extreme events of rainfall without thinking about the inequalities with a strong environmental justice background for us. Our cities in Latin America are really unequal. People can be affected in different ways, and we see this happening every day. In different ways, thinking about heat or rainfall, we can see that on a daily basis. So I think it's definitely impossible for us to don't approach these two things without considering what we call in the Anglophone world environmental justice. But I have to say that the Latin American science have always tackling the situation, trying to combine these two approaches. So it's the tradition we are training for. We started to think about the campaign in 2021 when I was on a sabbatical leave in the US. I just had the opportunity to open a NOAA newsletter, and I just saw the campaign there, the call for application, and I just applied, and we made it. So since we had the campaign approved, the first step was to activate our partnership with some organizations and the community to ensure their participation. Even considering that the team that ran the campaign was pretty much composed by academic people from university, the campaign was not supposed to be an academic campaign in general. We could, I like to highlight that because it's really important that we could do the campaign without the community and other organizations, but that's definitely not the main purpose of a heat mapping campaign that aims to put on the table the heat as an issue. Because as I said before, different people are differently affected by this. And we have to hear from them about that first step. So we had to consider that, and that was our first step. And this is a critical thing, particular in a tropical country and in a tropical city, because heat is not usually seen as a thing, as a bad thing. It's really hard to make people think heat is a bad thing for them. Not exactly this year. This year was definitely atypical. Particularly last week, we had a really strong heat wave in Rio. So people start definitely thinking about heat as a hazard. And people, we had really heavy impact because of the heat. We had a long heat wave, 5 days in a row. The temperatures peaked at 21 degrees Celsius, which was a big thing for September. So heat became a big deal right now. But at the time of the campaign, we had few people thinking about heat as a hazard in Rio. So we tried to bring people to the campaign to make sure, their approaches or their perspectives about the heat and how they feel that would be included in the campaign. So we designed 3 main strategies in running the campaign. The first one, we tried to dialogue with grassroots movements in general, particularly favela movements and other movements like Youth for Climate, to include them in the campaign with active roles, particularly trying to design the points of interest of measurement. So we tried to include their perspective about which neighborhood would be included in the campaign, because most of these neighborhoods were not included in no campaign before, because we had a couple of issues related to environmental justice in Rio de Janeiro City. So that was a thing for us. To do that, we started by sending them a description of the project, and we started inviting them to dialogue with us to include them in an effective way. The second strategy was to try to include local government through some of the city hall offices, mainly the Office for Environment and Climate, which just was recently included climate in its name. That was just Office of Environment, not Environment and Climate. That at that time, which was in last year until January, that was a tough time for them, because the local government was changed and people who were in charge were changing. But that still was important to dialogue with them, because we had some people which are like permanent staff, and they just got involved and engaged and support us a lot, not only from the Office of Environment and Climate, but they try, and they actually did it. They connect us with many other offices like Health Office, Urban Planning Office, Education, Traffic, Financial Crisis Office, because we do have this in Rio, particular for heavy rainfall. But that was really important because they could together draw the big picture about the importance of monitoring heat in the city. And they actually had some projects like trying to create an adaptation and alert system in Rio. So they were really interested in monitoring this in the city, because they are envisioning to do that next future. So we are definitely put everyone together and try to think about running the campaign. So first, grassroots; second, local government; and third, we try to engage people in community in general to participate in the campaign. So we start a campaign on social media, particularly on Instagram, which is really popular in Brazil, but also on Facebook and Twitter. And particularly in Instagram, we try to record or give voice to some people that are really affected by heat, particularly people who work outdoors, like street cleaners, street vendors, people who work in selling food in the streets. So we try to dialogue with these people, and we record them and we share, try to, you know, bring some empathy in the general public to engage these people. And I think these three aspects, these three strategies in trying to engage in community were really successful. And I mean, we definitely ran the campaign, and we had some definitely interesting findings, which are resonating until right now, particularly, as I said before, due to the heat wave we faced last week. So most of the same agents, the same community people and organizations, and even other people who were not engaged at the time of the campaign, they are reaching out and trying, you know, to run the campaign again for the next summer. And particular people from the local communities and favela movements, they want to engage more and run the campaign again, particularly trying to understand how heat happens in their territory. So I think that's really cool. And we are working with these communities right now and trying to, you know, bring other insights for understand better why and how the extreme heat happens in Rio de Janeiro City from a scientific point of view, but also together, definitely, with the communities. So that's it for now, but there are a lot of outcomes. So let's talk more about the questions and answer.
Thank you, Nubia. Looking forward to those outcomes. And I really like how you pitched it in as in like the three main like campaigns and strategies. The first one was looking at the grassroots, second at the governmental level, and the third was looking at it from a like social media and the community level. And I think it really does blend in what the previous conversations are about that Raquel and Abiyant talked about. There's an environmental justice angle that your work is doing by highlighting what the issues that are going on in the community through social media. But also with social media, you can also highlight the roads and infrastructure that breaks down because of the heat. Expanding concrete, for example, can damage infrastructure in like very hot summers, for example. And I do think that's amazing that in September in the Southern Hemisphere, it is already 21 degrees Celsius. Yes, that is hot. And it's so early too. And so next on our list of speakers, we have Morgan Szabo from the United States, who's going to talk about what she's been overseeing in the US on urban heat campaigns. So the floor is passed to you.
Thanks so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Apologies if I freeze. My internet is a little unstable. My name is Morgan Szabo, and I am the Community Heat and Health Information Coordinator with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration with the United States government. And so in this little intro, I'm going to give a quick overview of a program within the United States that's working to address extreme heat across all stakeholder levels, and specifically then get into a little bit of the details of how we're working to address urban heat. So I don't think I necessarily need to explain to this audience that we're headed towards a hotter future. We've been talking about this now. And we know that that means across the world that we're going to be facing these extreme temperatures more frequently and for longer periods of time. And in the US specifically, extreme heat kills more Americans each year than any other weather-related event. And it's also referred to here as a silent killer, which I know was shown in the Mentimeter poll too, because we don't see the effects nearly as clearly as a hurricane or a tornado. And in addition to the hundreds of annual deaths that occur, the thousands of emergency room visits as a result of heat-related illnesses, heat also has these additional societal impacts as well that our speakers have also talked about. There's huge economic impacts for the nation, including billions of dollars in productivity losses in agriculture from livestock and crop yields, and so much more. And extreme heat has caused damages to infrastructure, as we know, including buckling roadways, these down power lines, and impacts really the very nature of the environment. And within the US, people are really starting to pay attention to this problem as extreme heat has made headlines across the country this summer. And a lot of states in the United States broke temperature records this summer, experienced these multi-day heat waves, with some facing additional compounding impacts like droughts, wildfires, and flooding. And of course, as our speakers have also mentioned, we know this doesn't impact everyone the same. There's so many populations that are much more disproportionately affected to heat, including older adults, young children, also people experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, people with chronic health conditions, low income communities, and so many more. And so for the US specifically, again, there are many federal agencies worked separately on separate components of extreme heat, but to really better serve the American people on this issue and provide a coordinated federal response, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention launched a program called the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. And we launched this in 2015 to really develop and provide this actionable science-based information to help protect the nation from heat. And the National Integrated Heat Health Information System is an integrated approach to really provide expertise and decision support services on multiple timescales. So not just your emergency services, but also looking at the decadal timescales too, and really looking at that mitigation and resilience, again, to really design to build this resilience and reduce heat-related illness and death. And the National Integrated Heat Health Information System spans many US federal agency missions to deliver these solutions faster and more efficiently. And we're currently growing in our federal government partners as we move towards developing a heat strategy for the nation as well. And this group consists of an interagency working group as well as a partner network that really allows us to work with our state, local, tribal, NGO, academic partners, as well as international partnerships like many of the people you see on the screen today. So the National Integrated Heat Health Information System has 6 major pieces that we really focus on to deliver our vision of a heat resilient nation empowered to effectively address extreme heat and its impacts. And I'm just going to quickly go over the 6 of these, but the first one is defining demand. It's the most fundamental piece. So the federal government collaboration really finds out what decision makers need at what time scale and works together with these decision makers to develop the right information. So it's a two-way street. It's not just us telling everybody what they need. The second is improving observations and predictions. So based on these user needs, our network seeks to integrate and enhance the climate, the weather, health, and other science-based information to inform decisions to reduce the heat health risks at all time scales. A third aspect is enhancing research with solutions. So we coordinate interdisciplinary research, conduct pilot projects, and build relationships across these domains to really inform community decisions to mitigate heat risk. The fourth is co-develop products and tools across all time scales to provide this information to the nation. Our fifth is supporting planning and response. So this is the big one too. And a big example we have is a climate and health outlook document that combines the climate and health information to support heat planning, preparedness, response, especially for healthcare providers for the nation. And finally, our last focus area is to communicate and build capacity, because as we've mentioned, extreme heat's a silent killer, and communicating the risk of this problem is imperative. And so there's a lot of different initiatives and programs that this federal program has done, including launching heat.gov, a federal portal on heat, and again, these communication strategies. But I want to close with one of our very well-known programs, which is our community science urban heat island mapping campaign programs that Raquel and Nubia have mentioned. So since 2017, the National Integrated Heat Health Information System and NOAA have been working with private sector company Kappa Strategies and these communities across the country and internationally to map urban heat islands. And our program is very unique, as mentioned, because it's a community science project that relies on volunteers, organizers, and community-based organizations from each city or county to collect air temperature data, which really leads to education about heat and health in the location, but also a deeper understanding of how heat is impacting their community. And so these volunteers will travel around the city collecting data with proper equipment attached to their cars or maybe their bikes. And the final product of these campaigns is a set of high resolution air temperature and humidity data and a report that really provides a detailed analysis of the distribution of heat in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And we've had a lot of outcomes since the mapping has taken place in each community, including some tree planting campaigns, science museum exhibits, creating shelters at bus stops to really provide some more relief, communication, outreach efforts, using the data to create heat action plans, and so much more. And as I mentioned, we've started this mapping back in 2017, and since then we've mapped more than 80 communities across the country and 2 international cities for the first time, Freetown, Sierra Leone, and as Brian said, unfortunately, Eugenia cannot be with us today, as well as Rio de Janeiro, and we will be mapping Santiago. So excited to continue to work with Raquel as we get towards that implementation stage. And I do also want to note that all of the data reports from all of the Urban Heat Island campaigns are available on our website, heat.gov. And I'll turn it back over to you, Brian, but really looking forward to some of the more discussions we're going to have.
Thank you, Morgan. This has been really helpful. Really appreciate how you overlaid what the US is doing, and especially tapping into how the heat affects everyone in different ways, talking about the inequities in heat. But I really like how you are able to address what NIHHIS is doing, the National Heat Health Integrated Systems Network, and the 6 major demands. And it really highlights understanding what the community wants, defining the demand, then looking at observations, predictions. In a sense, it's trying to figure out what the community needs and trying to find that using the data to address that. So it's also science to action, providing tools, finding solutions, response, and even communicating and building the capacity. All of these things tie into each one of our speakers really well. And if you're just joining us today, my name is Brian Lung. I'm one of the Belmont Forum secretariats. And what we do at the Belmont Forum is to really look at and think about funding research that is transdisciplinary, trying to bring science to action. And I keep hitting on this theme today because it is difficult to get community engagement, make sure they understand what the developments are in the scientific field. And then with heat as a silent killer, as was mentioned before, it is an invisible situation. And how you work with the communities, whether it's through social media campaigns, such as Nubia mentioned, and talking about the other types of factors that affect heat and health, as Abiyat mentioned, really tackling the vulnerable communities that Raquel is planning on working on. These are things that I think will be valuable for any multi-hazard early warning system down the line, whether it's flooding or diarrheal diseases or whatnot. And so this next portion, we're going to shift over to Q&A, question and answers with me talking to the moderators. And the goal of this next section is to figure out what are some common practices. Although they did tap on these things earlier in their introduction, we're going to dive in a little deeper, talk a little bit more about what are the common themes and techniques that they probably are using. And if you have some more of those questions you want to dive right in, put it into the chat, the Q&A, or even let me know, and I'll definitely bring it up. The second thing I'm going to talk about is what are the differences when working at the local, national, and international level. Because this issue of heat is not just located within our cities, it is around the world. What are the differences? What are the similarities? And really tackling and diving deeper into that. So with that, I'm going to bring all our speakers and spotlight them and bring them all on board. And the first question that I'm going to ask is going to be towards Raquel. And the reason why I'm going in this order is because I wanted to really emphasize the idea that really starts with an idea and finding those stakeholders and really trying to make sure that you build a sense of trust with them to make sure that they're willing and able to open up to you to tell you what they need about the vulnerable communities that she works with. And then we're going to build up and talk to Abiyat and ask him a very similar question about what he's doing in India. And you'll start to see as we build up, each one has a different progression layer in this urban heat campaign. And that way you can see these are the steps that we can envision and potentially create a milestone for you, whether it's heat related or something else in the future. And so the first question I want to ask Raquel is, what are some common, tell us how you work with the local community or even neighborhoods to educate and work with them on extreme heat. And I know you're just starting out. So tell me what are ideas that you're thinking about in terms of engagement and what are you thinking of the tools to use to work with these communities? Over to you.
Thanks, Brian. as you just mentioned, right, we are in the process of initiating this project. And so I guess I'll start by describing a bit on how we ended up building this network of collaborators. As I mentioned briefly during my introduction, in general, heat and extreme heat is not at the top of the concerns of different stakeholders in Santiago and in Chile. Even though Chile is going to be impacted by multiple dimensions of climate change, and we're experiencing more and more severe heat waves, the reality hasn't translated into action or even into concrete action plans to tackle the effects of extreme heat. So similar to what's going on, I guess, in many parts of the world, because especially since summer last year, we started experiencing more and more heat waves. It's the issue started popping up in the news more, right? In different TV shows and radio and even like social networks. So I guess there's more awareness now, but still, when I started just doing some research on who's working on extreme heat, who's concerned about extreme heat in the local scenario, I was a bit shocked to find that there wasn't really a lot of going on. And so the first thing that I did is I reached out to other researchers and academics and universities who I knew that were doing work, again, from this academic perspective on heat, climate change, and environmental justice. So try to come up with some sort of a survey of who's doing what and who might be interested in joining this initiative. And so that part was easy because it's only a handful of researchers doing work in this space in Santiago. It's a really small community. But then the next step was a bit hard, trying to find local actors, NGOs, grassroots movements, or even just concerned citizens that were thinking about extreme heat. And what I ended up doing was reaching out to different organizations that were concerned with different topics, problems of urban life that were somewhat affected by extreme heat. And then I realized that people who were thinking about sustainable commuting or urban sustainable development or environmental justice, they're all thinking about heat and extreme heat, but they are not really framing the work that they do or the problems that they're trying to tackle in that context. So what in doing that for us was really important to try to avoid these. I think it's a predominant dynamic of researchers trying to engage with the community, which is more like coming from our ivory tower. Hey, we know what your problems are, we bring the solutions, and trying to really listen what their concerns and their needs, both in terms of data, infrastructure, resources, you name it, but what they wanted to get out of this experience. And so in doing that, a couple of strategies to engage with communities and education and risk awareness started to emerge. I'd say what one thing that we're still trying to figure out how to do is try to build a web platform, a web mapping platform that can display the extent and the magnitude of extreme risk, but overlay that with a map of Santiago, but also where vulnerable communities are located, where susceptible populations are located, or places of interest, either because it's a strategic infrastructure, going to what Abhiyan was saying about the concerns in India, but also places where people gather during the summer, and how that might inform not just government, to implement adaptation strategies, but also so that people can know what the extent of the threat is for them in their neighborhoods, their schools where their kids attend to, or community centers, or even just commuting routes. We are also, during the day of the campaign, we want to try to make this citywide event that's going to be the heat day, right, or extreme heat day, and just at different information points throughout the cities, in different universities, neighborhood organizations, to just where we can just convey, give people information, reach out with a couple of days and weeks in anticipation so that they can approach us with questions or requirements even, or ideas on how we can tackle this threat. And throughout the process, we were able to engage with the local government, and we are also going to be utilizing all their network of collaborators and infrastructure, both physical and in terms of communication, to develop education campaigns, trying to also gauge to characterize risk perception about the community, among the community. And these are a couple of things that I can think to as to what we're planning on doing both with the data and during the campaign. But again, I just want to highlight that we really want to make it so that it's the community's concerns and their needs and their requirements what's at the center of this initiative. And again, avoiding this dynamic of traditional academic dynamic of just voicing needs from our ivory tower.
Thanks, Raquel. I like how you really try to make it community-centric. And I think in terms of centric, I mean it more not just like asking what they need, but also making it entertaining and engaging and fun for the community so that science does become fun. Information is fun. Knowledge is fun. And I think centering it around the ideas of like with the Day of the Dead campaign, thinking about these issues and also bringing it turning into a family event, starting the culture, creating a community of practice in a sense of why we should care about heat, ways we can spread awareness of heat is really important. And that's what I can take from the point that you made in terms of what you're thinking about moving forward. Next, I want to ask Aviant, how you're working with the local community to educate and work with them on extreme heat.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian, and thank you so much, Raquel, for sharing your experience of working with the communities in Chile, I believe. And I believe we share somewhat similar experience because we have some kind of similar climatic, profile for our countries. So tropical countries, particularly India, if I talk about. There is this general consensus that heat is not an issue, right? It's an issue for the northern regions, for the global north now because of the global warming fueled in by climate change and fueled in by global warming. But for tropical regions largely, which do face like harsh summer seasons, they believe it's not an issue. So convincing stakeholders, not just the government, but also the people, like the local communities, is a big challenge. Making them recognize that it is an issue. It can affect your health. It can affect your productivity. It can affect your livelihood, and it can affect largely your future. Is a big challenge, I would say. We faced that. We did face that in government initially, but luckily the government is very proactive on working this issue. For our work that we have been doing in India for past more than a decade, starting from a city, but now the national agencies, even just imagine Prime Minister coming out and taking a cognizance of the imminent heat season, asking the states to take the proactive measures. Our Honorable Prime Minister has been doing it for the past couple of years. He comes out and addresses the states to take the issue seriously and take all the proactive measures to address the issue of extreme heat, to protect the people, to protect the economy. So that has been there, one thing. But by and large, I would say it is still, in tropical countries, it is still not considered as seriously as the other disasters. For example, the flood. If I talk about the climate-related events only, flood or if I talk about not non-climatic events like earthquake. So making people aware of it is a big challenge, that it can affect your health. You may not see it directly because it is not something like earthquake that has a short onset or an immediate onset and will affect your life or your livelihood or your house immediately, but it can affect at a slow pace, but it can affect you at a long term. So that's a big challenge. uh, and as I mentioned, uh, it, the impact is unequal, right? uh, how it will affect me will not be the same how it will affect a poorer community in the slum area or within the household level also. India, I don't know how much you know about India, but in India, I mean, it can affect within a family, it can affect different people differently. And not just in India, in other places also, because it's also a matter of exposure. So how much I'm exposed to, we are just talking about the heat from the outdoor exposure so far. All these heat campaigns, I believe, are just focusing on the outdoor exposure, are not talking about the indoor exposure. Whereas in low and middle income countries, the indoor exposure is also a big challenge, where we have poor ventilation. Sometimes the indoor temperature could be much higher than the outdoor ambient temperature. So when we ask about people not to venture out, during the extreme heat hours, or not to go outside, do we really know what's the temperature they're exposed to indoor conditions? We don't know. We really don't know that thing. So those are the challenges. And when we tell them, I'm talking about the most vulnerable ones, the most poorest one. When we are talking about, don't go outside and during the extreme heat hours and protect yourself from exposing to the sun. Okay, but that's the question of their bread and butter. If they don't do that, those daily wage earners, if they don't go out, what will they do? So we need to modulate that message in a way, and also prepare our institutions, our organizations, our governments accordingly. Okay, so if we ask them not to expose themselves during the extreme heat hours during the afternoon, they need to shift their working hours during early morning hours and late evening hours. So those things have to come out in a concerted manner from both government, private institutions, like for construction workers, the builder lobbies, and laborers. So these things has to be put together. But the good part is that the communities are getting aware about it, particularly the women in vulnerable communities, living in the vulnerable communities in the slum areas, are getting aware about it. They are putting together the measures. For example, recently we are working with another city in the western part of the India, in the state of Rajasthan, a city called Jodhpur, which is a tier 2 city, a small city, where we are working with our partner called Mahila Housing Trust, a women-led organization which works on ensuring the safe housing conditions and livelihood for the women living in the slum households. Their women are, under the heat action plan of Jodhpur, are so aware about the issue. They are putting together the efforts, not just to percolate the early warnings, coming from the meteorology department, from the weather department, to the vulnerable communities, but also working on adaptation measures like cool roof. They're deploying these low cost, energy efficient solutions such as cool roof, on their rooftops, teen rooftops, and in their slum households, which is not just helping them in providing them the indoor thermal comfort during daytime, but also helping them in improving their productivity, improving their, increasing their, decreasing their energy demand for cooling. I mean, there are several co-benefits for such measures, but the point is that the community need to be made aware about this, and they need to be given alternate solutions particularly the vulnerable communities, when we talk about when we ask them to protect themselves from extreme heat during the heat seasons. Yeah.
Thanks, Abiance. I like how you really pitched it in terms of working with in terms of literacy and understanding how heat really does affect, because in tropical belts and tropical regions, you're not aware of it. You just get used to that. If heat is normal, and therefore extreme heat is also normal, and really making that paradigm shift to really think about beyond just the immediate, oh, heat is bad for you, but really other factors. Love to explore that later as let's see what the people in the audience say. But next, I want to tap into Nubia's knowledge on how she works with the local community and in Rio, and to educate and to work with them on extreme heat. Over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I think most of what Abiano and Raquel said that can be in a certain way applied to Rio. Like when I try to draw these three strategies in trying to engage the first level, the social movements and the grassroots movements actually, and the second level, the local government, and the third level, what I said is general public. We definitely were drawing strategies to engage with these people and trying to work with them in designing every single step of the campaign. So at the first level, we were trying to talk with the grassroots movement. We were actually trying to dialogue and learn from them how they were tackling the climate things and climate issues in the city. So we learned a lot from the movement Youth for Climate. And I mean, the youth movement in Rio is raising and it's becoming a big deal right now, particularly in the more poorest neighborhoods in the West Zone, which unfortunately we would not able to monitor, but at some level, the West Zone and the other part of the city, we did monitor. And I mean, we learned a lot from them, particularly related to their fight for urban greening and their fight for public spaces, more public spaces and parks and more green public spaces, actually, which I mean, it's well known in the literature, the relationship between green spaces and cooling areas. And one of our outcomes is actually a paper we are finishing, trying to relate both information, like the data we collected from the campaign and the other variables like urban green, like sky view factor, like land use and cover. And we just learned from them at that time. We learned from literature, and now we have a very robust data set that we can affirm that more than 70% of the higher temperatures are because the lack of urban green. So, I mean, we are learning, and people are concluding that stuff from different ways, both literature and their experience in living in the streets and living in the city. So I think one of the really good thing is bring them to learn from them. And that was a really important thing for us because they could understand them as an active partners in the campaign. The second one was the local government. As I said, we had some issues related to local government, mainly because we have the permanent staff, but we also have changes due to the changing the local government level. So the permanent staff, which are people who are working and have been working in the local government for a long term, they were really aware of the heat as an issue. Like that was a little surprising for us because, as I said, Rio de Janeiro is a city which is really well known because of the landslides and flash floods. So this is a big deal in the city and has been like this for a long time, at least from the early 90s, because we have, facing even more frequent and strong heavy rainfall events that trigger landslides and trigger flash floods, and we have a lot of deaths and people losing their lives and their houses and everything. So we have a strong monitoring network in the city, monitoring heavy rainfall in each 15 minutes. But some of the staff, permanent staff in Rio de Janeiro City, mainly from the Office of Crisis and Office of Environment and Climate, they are aware, they are really engaged, and they're trying to develop an alert system for a heat alert system. So these people found in our initiative, in our team, a way to collect the data and reinforce the need for this. So these are really great people, but at the same time, we had to be together with the permanent staff to try to convince the non-permanent staff that monitoring heat would be a really important thing for the city. And at that point, we need structure, we need cars to monitor, we need something. That was a challenge. As Abian said, for these people who were not exactly involved to environmental things, environmental issues or climate emergency or everything, that was hard to convince some of the non-permanent staff that would be important. So that was a challenge. We had to have several meetings, maybe more than 20 meetings since the beginning of the campaign until the end, and to try to convince them. But we had awesome support of the permanent staff from all of these offices. And one important thing about the offices and the local government was the permanent staff from several offices got engaged in the campaign, particularly the Office of Environment and Climate, but also health. And they are really interested in running the campaign again because of dengue fever. And they want to monitor and they want to collect more data at this definitely local level, neighborhood level, street level, because even if we have weather stations monitoring, humidity and rainfall and temperature, we don't have this monitoring at the really local level, street level, which is really important for them to tackle this challenge at this level, because at this level we have dengue fever happening. So they are really interested, and they just put all the efforts, and they did great during the campaign. So they are awesome partners in this campaign. And also urban planning and crisis office. So, I mean, we just engage with them because they found in us an opportunity to put the heat as an issue on the table of the local government. And they found an opportunity to do that. So that was a good strategy, I think. And we try to learn from them these aspects of a long term in the city, like which areas they already know were critical for heat. So they highlighted and they included some points of interest, as well as the local and grassroots movements. They include some points of interest to monitor, because they were planning to do some infrastructure actions in some places which were critical for heat. So we have had a spot in the border of West Zone, which we actually monitored, because they were building a huge green public space, but it's not happening right now. So we're just monitoring without this green space, and we are hoping to monitor with this green space, just to make sure the green public spaces are playing a major role in cooling the city. So, I mean, we collected and we worked together with them. And I think the third one was the engaging with the public in general, as I said, because we had a lot of people who actually don't know exactly how to engage in climate actions. Even if we consider that we have a lot of information through social media, to TV or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or everything. But sometimes some people just need an opportunity to engage. And we just invested a lot of our time and work in generating content, in producing some content for social media, just to, trying to create an environment of, empathy, and try to assess these people and give them an opportunity to engage with their action. So that was really good for us, because most of the people who, received our content just subscribed for, being a person who were monitoring the cars and things like that. And most of them are message us again about, where you build the next campaign, because we want to go again, and things like that. So I think in general, the main thing for us is creating a culture of heat monitoring, of heat as an issue in all levels, in both, local, grassroots movements, in local government, and in public in general. And I mean, when I'm saying that creating culture, I'm not saying that this culture have to come from top to bottom, but instead from bottom to top, because if we construct that, and it's a challenge for a long term, we are not doing that only through one campaign. We have to work more and more and over again every year or every season to build this. But if we create this heat culture in the city, I think that would be really easier for us, not only to generating data, but also to support initiatives from different agents in the city to tackle this challenge. So I think this is the most important thing in general. There are different ways to create this culture, but I think we have to commit to this creating heat culture.
Thanks, Nubia. Thanks, Nubia. It's really helpful to see you break down the 3 different types of ways that you're engaging the community. First, at the community, the government, and then the public level. And I think one of the themes that I'm really seeing throughout is that you use experience for them to build that trust, so you can really get that message through. And I think that is a unique angle. I think, and an experience to hear from you later about it is really important. And also just that persistence in just getting to those permanent and non-permanent staff, that especially the non-permanent staff, that this is important. And that's, I think there's a question on that about that later, where people want to understand how you did it, like in terms of the techniques, but we'll get that after Morgan. Morgan, love to know about your how you in the U.S. How you work with the local community, different cities in the U.S. to educate and work with them on extreme heat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple different ways that'll kind of go over this. But before I do, just want to say, Nubia, it's so great to hear that there's so many people in Rio that are still engaged with the campaign, excited to do it again, and wanting to replicate it and add new factors in. So that's just really great to hear. So for the urban heat island campaigns within the United States, as I've mentioned, we've mapped more than 80 cities. So we've been able to build this really great and robust community of practice among all of these cities and counties that have done this mapping since 2017. And so by bringing all of these stakeholders together that have participated in the mapping, it's also helped them to be able to network among each other and learn what's worked for, this city in California might work for my city in North Carolina, even though they're very geographically different and are facing different types of heat, that implementing these different solutions might work in these different places. And also learning, about their governance structure in their city or in their state, in ways that if one city has maybe some more key policies than another city, they can learn from each other and how to maybe go along that route. So building that community of practice has been a really great part of the urban heat campaigns within the United States. But I'll say that too, that when we run these heat island campaigns, we're working with the community from the start and making sure they know what different organizations to be including when they're doing these campaigns. So again, reaching out to a lot of the different stakeholders in their communities, making sure that maybe their local decision makers know what's going on, that different community-based organizations are being included, and of course with environmental justice, making sure that those most disproportionately impacted to heat are also having a seat at the table when they're doing this mapping, because as we know, they are probably living in the hottest neighborhoods. And a lot of, when we look at the maps after we get the data back, in most cases, the hottest neighborhoods are those that are low-income communities, minority communities, and a lot is a face of historical redlining. So we really want to make sure that those populations have a seat at the table at the mapping, know that the mapping's happening, and especially too because it's a federal government funded project. So a lot of people hear, oh, the federal government, I don't want them coming into my neighborhood, but by having this being this community science project and including everyone, it's not the same. It's not your federal government scientists coming in, collecting data, and then leaving and never having any interaction. We continue to have this interaction with these communities from the beginning and after they get their data reports, and seeing how we can work with them to implement those solutions that they're interested in. And as I mentioned in my opening, those implementations could be maybe they want to do a mass tree planting campaign because they see that this neighborhood over here has almost no trees, and this is contributing hugely to the urban heat island effect. How can we get some federal funding from, say, from the Forest Service and apply for grants that would be able to help us with that? It can also be, as I said, adding bus shelters or adding shading structures over bus stops, because you can see along those data reports that bus stops are in some of the hottest neighborhoods. And so by just adding some shelters, it can give bus riders relief on a hot day. So it's been really great to work with so many of these communities as they're getting to also that implementing stage and thinking about what do we need to do? How can we help these communities? And from the federal government's perspective too, we've been able to build a lot of tools to be able to help them with this. So as Raquel was mentioning about, in Chile, how can you get this vulnerability data mapped with overlays to be able to really understand that? That's something that we've been able to do for the communities in the United States. On our website, heat.gov, we were able to build this interactive tool called our heat equity mapping tool that we overlaid that vulnerability data with some, the White House has a climate economic justice screening tool. I think I got that right. That we're able to overlay that extra data with our heat data and really do a deep dive at the census tract level and understand who are those most disproportionately impacted to heat and where are they, and how can we make sure that we're implementing those solutions in those areas? So that's kind of one part of how we're working in the community. The second, as a tie-in with this urban heat island mapping, back in 2021, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration held climate and equity pilot roundtables. And so we held these pilot projects in a couple different locations across the US, but we decided to really focus on heat within them. And we chose 4 cities in the United States, in Las Vegas, Nevada, Charleston, South Carolina, Miami, Florida, and Phoenix, Arizona. And we wanted to do a deeper dive in heat with those communities and go through pilot projects that had 4 different stages. But one of the big one was a heat tabletop scenario exercise. And so there's been a lot of different emergency planning exercises in cities around the world, a lot of the times focus on different types of different disasters, but there hasn't really been ones on heat. And so it was a really unique experience working in these cities, making sure, again, that those important stakeholders were at the table. So not just your emergency managers, but also your public health departments, also thinking about your utilities, because if there's power outages because of overlaying, there's so many people using electricity during heat emergencies, like how are the utilities responding to that? And just so making sure that all of the relevant stakeholders are at the table, again, including the nonprofits and environmental justice communities too, and having those conversations about, okay, if this pretend scenario that could very well likely happen next year happens during this, busy week during the city, how does the city respond? And not just how do we respond in the moment, but also how do we make sure that 10 years from now, that this never happens again, that we can make sure to have the plans in place to prepare for these things. So that's just another way that we have been working with the community, and we're going to be publishing all of the results of these pilots and how we kind of did these scenario exercises so that they can be replicated in other communities across the world too. And then the third is, within the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, we have a whole team of doing communication. So across the federal government, 10 plus federal agencies that are working to make sure we have consistent messaging on extreme heat, because as we've talked about, it's hard to communicate it. I grew up in the southern part of the United States, and it was always hot down there. So people don't necessarily think of heat as an issue. It's just something you adapt to. It's always there. But this is the coolest summer we're probably going to have for the rest of our lives. It's only going to get worse, and we're also experiencing it. It's happening everywhere, and it's experiencing it differently. But again, because of kind of what each part of the U.S. has, like in the Pacific Northwest, people don't really have air conditioning. It's just something that they haven't necessarily had to buy because it's never gotten that hot, and so people are having to adapt. So with this group, we're really trying to make sure that we have that messaging that's targeted to these communities, educating about heat. So we have 2 big social media campaigns that we do throughout the summer. The first one being just before heat season starts, because we also know, looking at a lot of emergency department data in the United States, a lot of the deaths of heat happen kind of before and after the heat season. And so it's people not really thinking about that the heat season's happening, not really taking those preparation steps, things we know, like making sure you have water, maybe not wearing dark clothes on a hot day, all those different things. So a lot of, we do that first campaign again to really get people thinking about, okay, heat season's coming. A lot of these deaths might be happening now. What can you do? How can you prepare your community? And then the second one is we have a 5-week social media campaign in July and August, so typically the hottest months in the United States, and continuing just to push that messaging. And again, it's coming from all of these federal partners initially, which are these trusted sources of information in the nation, but we also work with our different the National Weather Service forecasting, and so the local meteorologists in these cities are also pushing out these messages. So it's making sure to get more localized to these communities. And we've had so many nonprofits, public health departments join in on our campaign too, using these similar hashtags. And so the message is just continuing to get shared more and more, because as we've talked about, if it's a silent killer, but its heat-related deaths are largely preventable as long as we have the proper planning, education, and preparedness. And so we're really trying to make sure to do that when we're working with our local communities.
Thanks, Morgan. That was really a really nice high-level overview of what is happening in the U.S. It's fascinating how you're able to get the community rallied behind an activity, have them see the results of those scientific progress in those measurements on the ground. And I think it's really funny that you do mention that when the feds come in, it's actually a good thing in this sense, because you're doing something that's actually good for the community, having them see that they can plant a tree, and that reduces the urban heat index in that one region. And I think it's also fascinating to see this connect between Raquel, Abiyance, Nubia, and yourself. And in terms of how do you work with the community? How do you engage the local stakeholders in the government? And then now you're at the stages, you've got the government all engaged and want the same response. Now how do we communicate this message to the public? So it's not just like a awareness, but it's more like a preparation. In a sense, how do you prepare for a heat wave? And I think that almost like, what is it, foresight in a sense, to get the community's attention. So it's not just thinking about what's immediate. Now it's shifted from community-based focus in terms of getting their trust. Now it's more, we have the trust. Let's think of ways to make sure that they are protected and prepared for a heat wave. But I want to come back to a couple of questions that came from the Q&A that I got. It dives into some of the questions that are issues that the panelists picked up. And the first one is that I'm going to point to is Abiyance. Earlier, you mentioned about the nighttime temperatures and how you're getting awareness around that, shifting the culture to a nighttime focused situation, like in terms of daytime is very hot. Then you have early morning and nighttime. can you talk a little bit more about how you're getting that awareness that nighttime is a good, the nighttime campaigns, to put it that way?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I believe nighttime temperature is something that not just India, but across the globe is still something that the early warning systems around the heat waves or extreme heat hazard and heat action plans are still trying to put together to formulate the messaging, to make people aware about it. But if I talk about the science behind it, it's fact that nighttime temperatures are important, because it's not the temperature that affects the people, or I'm sorry to say, but the temperature that kills the people, it's the heat that affects the people. And when I say heat, it's a cumulative heat, the load of heat that people are exposed to. And when I say heat, it's not just a maximum temperature of a daytime touching 40, 42 degree or 45 degrees Celsius, but it's the cumulative heat where the nighttime temperature also remains high, and daytime remains high for several days, and then people don't get rid of this load of heat that they are exposed to. There are epidemiological studies. One of that we did for India, again for the city of Ahmedabad, where we analyzed the 30-year of data of daily temperature, daily mortality, daily all-cause mortality, and the temperature and other weather data, where we found that after a certain thresholds during summers, the risk of people dying is higher when the nighttime temperature rises as compared to the daytime temperature. If we set them at a bar, restrict them at a bar during the summers. For example, in Ahmedabad, it was that when the nighttime temperatures rises from 28 degrees Celsius to by every 1 degree Celsius, the risk of mortality rises by 9.8 percentage. And not just this, it is also been seen in the market sector, in the cooling sector, market sector. For example, the demand for air conditions increases when the nighttime temperature increases from 29 degrees Celsius, at least in India. So that has been documented from the market also, that a demand for air condition increases when the nighttime temperatures remains above 29 degrees Celsius for several days. How are we incorporating this in messaging or in our heat action plans in India and in the Southern Asia? We have been only forecasting, and we are still only forecasting and alerting people from the point of view of maximum temperature only. There is a challenge of people's understanding about these different weather variables or thermal indices, heat index, if you call, UTC. There are several indexes. I don't want to get into that, but we need to understand what people at large in a community, in a city, in a state, in a country like India, where we just have one weather service, right, which has like their branches across the state, across the country, but their formats are standard. So people are aware about temperature only. They are not aware about heat index, which is not just temperature. It's a mixed, combination of heat, humidity, and other variables. Temperature, humidity, and other variables. We have been alerting people from the maximum temperature point of view only, daily Tmax or maximum temperature point only. But we have started, our Indian Meteorology Department has started forecasting and issuing the information, not alerts, but information around the minimum temperature as well. So throughout the summer, in fact, throughout the year, the cities and the states and districts are made aware about the forecast of what will be the next 5 days maximum temperature and minimum temperature, and how much it is departuring from the average normal, So people are made aware about it, but our heat wave conditions are still defined based on only maximum temperature. We are still not considering the minimum temperature, but there is a lot of science research going behind it in India and in other parts of the world, and in other parts of the Asia as well. Hopefully we'll soon have a better index to alert people about the extreme heat, which will not just be based on the maximum temperature, but will also have a sense of minimum temperature or a nighttime temperature. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhinav. It's a really great overview and those initiatives. But I think it's also really interesting that you have some of the data to back it up to show that there is, and as nighttime temperature rise, you also see people having that incentive to buy an air conditioning unit to stay cool in the evenings and get that. There's also a health component to good sleep too, as well. I mean, that's another an invisible effect. Now that I think about it, so I really appreciate that. The next question I have is for Nubia, that's from the audience, and that is, how did you build that early trust with the community? And I think where this is coming from is how you got people interested and how you got them connected. Was it through experiences, and how did you get them to get those experiences out so that you develop that trust so they can open up to you, so you can work with those vulnerable communities?
Thanks, Brian. I think the first thing related to, get people, engaged is related to who we are talking about, right? So if you are considering that our urban spaces are unequal and we have different impacts of heat in different places, we have to understand that these people are different, okay? So the first thing we try to do as a strategy, as I said, was related both the grassroots movement, but also with the social media. And we try to bring some people who were definitely more exposed and potentially more affected to heat. So, I mean, if you consider Rio de Janeiro is a huge city with a lot of people working outdoors in a precarious work, as I said, like street vendors and people who sell like ICT in the beach, which is highly impacted, through heat. When we bring these people and when we record their experience and when you share their experience with heat, and when we consider this is a genuine experience, which can tell us a lot about how heat can be a bad thing, I think people can be and feel affected in a positive way from this experience, and people can see them being affected too, because some of them experience this impact of heat in their daily life. Even if they're not street vendors, but if they spend a lot of time outdoors in, have to take a public transportation and walk for long to buy groceries or other stuff. So I think the main thing is to bring these different aspects of this different impacts of heat to the screen, and say that we are talking about them. We want them to talk about them. Actually, it's not like I am talking about them, but they are talking about them, and there are different ways and they are affected. So I think when we open this space and we put in the center of the thing their voices and their experience, and multiple experiences, actually, we can build or start building a trust experience with them, a trust relationship with them. I think this is the first step. And the second thing is keep working and keep talking to the people and stand, with them in the long term. I mean, our experience was only, it happened this year our campaign ran in January 27, but we have been working with them since like August or maybe early July last year. And we actually have been trying with underrepresented communities before because of our academic background. But the Heat Watch campaign just after the data set or after the data was published, it became a big thing. And people could understand, how the heat is affecting them. And unfortunately for, we all, because we will face more and more heat waves. But fortunately for a campaign, people start asking and inviting us to talk about it in the different levels. So even national media and local media, they are asking about that, particularly after the heat wave. So I think we are seeing a game change about the heat in Brazil, particularly, and in Rio in general. And together, this game change with these communities not only being represented by, but being in the center of the campaign, I think these two things together can be really useful for us and can provide more engagement and trust with the communities, which is the most important thing. I think without the communities, we can do nothing. They are the main reason I think we are monitoring heat in the city level. Like, we have to produce data, we have to generate some analysis and some scientific products to make sure we can provide them public policies to, we have adaptation and mitigation and even forecasts and alert systems. So we have to build a structure because of the communities, and mainly because of the underrepresented communities, which are definitely more affected. So I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Nubia. I like how you positioned it and said that you just really want them to hear to speak. And once you give them a platform to talk about their issues, they feel like they're being heard. And I think that's the first part on the step in any of the conversations moving forward. And at this point, I'm going to start to close, because I think we had a really good conversation on how you all built these heat campaigns. And I want to, in this part, shift and have everyone give their final thoughts in terms of what do you see as opportunities and challenges. I know we've had such a good discussion. I would love to talk more, but it's at the top of the hour. So again, I want to go around the table again, probably the same order, and ask, what are some opportunities you see? Or if you want to talk about a challenge that you foresee coming up in doing these heat mapping, urban heat mapping challenges. So Raquel, I guess for you, since you're just starting out, what are some of the challenges that you see or opportunities?
Apologies, my connection seems to be weak. It's been great learning from everyone's experiences around this topic. I've just been taking even some notes on great ideas that we could replicate for our heat mapping campaign here in Santiago. And in terms of back to your question, Brian, I think I see this project and as a really fantastic opportunity to really make the threat of heat exposure more visible for not just the general population, but really an opportunity to place this as a concern that should be at the top of regulators' minds when it comes to how are we going to be planning, thinking our cities towards the future, considering that this problem is only going to get worse with time. So along that line, I think that just bringing this issue to everyone's attention, it's also going to provide a great opportunity to highlight the need of monitoring heat, and that this is a fantastic point of a start, right? But there should be a sustainable plan on how we're going to be monitoring the extent, right, and the distribution of this threat. And for that, we're going to need to mobilize public maybe private resources to do this in order to promote action. And again, but since we're going to be making this as visible as we can, we really hope that this is going to be providing that opportunity to, again, like, promote action. And I think it's another fantastic opportunity, right? But it's the opportunity to connect different actors around the topic of climate change, climate emergency, and heat exposure. But I also think that this is going to be a challenge to, again, like, create a network of collaborators that's going to be sustainable in time, and it's going to really continue working beyond the scope of this project, and also incorporating, like, really incorporating the needs and concerns and opinions of those who are going to be mostly affected by it. So both an opportunity and a challenge there.
Love it. Abiyat, I want to ask you whether or not you want to add to what Raquel has said, and in terms of India and what you see as an opportunity and a challenge.
I mean, sorry. I mean, she really pointed out the opportunities and challenges. I don't know if I should mention it, but I'm also part of the Global Heat Health Information Network, which is a joint venture of WHO, WM, and several other international nonprofit academias and several other organizations, including my organization, NRDC. And NOAA and NIHHIS, of course. I should not say, I mean, she rightly pointed out it's a challenge to bring different actors, different stakeholders together to address the issue of this extreme heat. It's unfortunate that we have opportunity. We have opportunity as in every year is breaking record of past year, past decades or past years. Heat is breaking records, so we have opportunity, and I would say an unfortunate opportunity, which we must, take benefit from. And the challenge is, unlike other disasters, earthquake, flood, we have legislations, we have regulations or maybe rules around them, plans which are notified, but not for heat. Even FEMA, if I'm not wrong, and Morgan can correct me, and I really appreciate the work that Morgan and NIHHIS team is doing on the issue of extreme heat, and we have been learning from them. We are glad to be partnering with them on several avenues and learning from them. Heat is still not regulated, and it must be regulated. So we need to have more emphasis on heat governance, I would say. That's a challenge which is in front of us, but that's the challenge that we are trying to address. We need to have a more regulated actions for heat, which can only be possible if we have something on a strengthened heat governance, which US is doing, has started doing because of the advocacy that NIHHIS has been doing for several years. And we hope to learn from them and, try to learn from them and do something in the global South in the coming future. So yeah, heat governance is something as a opportunity and both challenge that we want to take further. Yeah.
Thanks, Abiyat. Nubia, any final thoughts on challenges or opportunities you want to add?
Yeah. I think we have all the opportunities, a challenge, as Abiyat said about heat governance, So engaging with people and have people coming, reaching out and asking about the new campaign and what they could do to support a new campaign is really a great thing, particularly when we are trying to reach out to monitor their own neighborhoods, which are definitely the most vulnerable neighborhoods. So I think the self-organizing, grassroots movements, they are really definitely into the heat thing. So I think it's a really good opportunity to have more people engaged and more people generating data and generating demands, demanding from local government things. And I think it's a really good thing, but it's also a challenge because once you have more and more data and more and more needs from the local citizens, from movements, you need to have an answer or a response from local government and from the other agents, such as universities too. So we have more work to do and try to put this work together in an effective way to try to make the city a better place to live, which is definitely a huge challenge, mainly considering a city like Rio, which is, I'm not sure if you all know Rio, but that's a huge city. It's a good and bad city at the same time. I usually say that I love and I hate Rio at the same, level, more love than hate. But anyway, it's a huge challenge. So, we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of opportunities and challenges to face. But I think if we do together, we are good. So that's it.
Thanks, Nubia. Morgan, last final thoughts on opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, I think Abhiant summed it up so well with the heat governance issue. I think not only just there's so many layers to it and there's so many points to start, but it's also not a fast process necessarily. Like it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think and an opportunity is having these type of conversations and talking with so many different stakeholders and people who are so passionate about this issue. We will get there. It just might take a little bit of time. And I will say for an opportunity, this conversation has been much more focused on urban heat, but I think an opportunity is how we can also adapt all this work for rural populations as well. And because that is another population disproportionately impacted in so many different ways, and making sure that they're also having this level of care and attention on extreme heat too. So I'm really excited of where we can get to for rural populations as well.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Nubia. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Abhiant. I'm really glad to have this conversation with you all. And thank you so much for actually running along with me with this on this journey and having this conversation. And for the audience for participating and asking questions and to the members. We had a lot more planned in terms of questions, but there's such an interesting topic from all points of views and all around the world and how everyone was at different stages of the process. I do agree we should definitely keep this conversation going and looking at different angles. And I think it's not just applicable just for urban heat, but thinking about in terms of what Abhiant mentioned earlier about infrastructure and agriculture and even infrastructure and all. And I'd love to continue this further. One of the things, the ways that we will do this is most likely at belmontforum.org as our way of bringing the world together and around transdisciplinary environmental change research. And this is one of those themes. And so again, I want to thank everyone here for joining today. And we will record this session, as you can obviously tell, and put it online. So you can definitely pass and share the word, ask questions on our YouTube channel. Belmont Forum is the name on YouTube. And so again, of that, thank you so much. And we hope that you will join another SUNGA session or another Belmont Forum session in the near future. Thank you so much.